There have been increasing studies in the literature stating that there's a pandemic of vitamin D deficiency in the United States and throughout the world, and there's also increasing testing for vitamin D blood levels, 25-hydroxy D blood levels, most of which is unnecessary and not recommended. The recommended dietary allowance is set by the Institute of Medicine, now the National Academy of Medicine, and it's defined as the intake of a nutrient that meets the needs of at least 97.5% of the population, and it's set for the United States and Canada for vitamin D. It's true that everyone should strive to have the recommended dietary allowance of 600 to 800 IUs a day, 600 for up to age 70 and 800 IUs a day for those above age 70. And it's actually fine to get more than that, even to get 1,000, 2,000, and up to 4,000 is what the Institute of Medicine says may be associated with adverse events. It's called the tolerable upper intake level. The concern is about the blood level for vitamin D, which is not really considered to be necessarily reliable. There's a lot of variability across labs. The universal screening for vitamin D blood levels is unnecessary for the vast majority of the population, and that's what the professional organizations such as the Institute of Medicine and the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force have been saying. And what it leads to is chasing a number. Often the lab assay results are not reliable. In many of the labs, it may not be a reliable number, and then it will be repeated multiple times, or it will lead to excessive supplementation with vitamin D in order to reach a cut point that is felt to be necessary, when there really isn't clear evidence that the entire population needs to reach any specific blood level. So the committee that set the recommended dietary allowance and the various guidelines for vitamin D intake looked at more than 1,000 studies and very comprehensively reviewed the literature. And based on bone health, they set the recommended dietary allowance at 600 to 800 IUs a day as the amount that would be needed to meet the needs for bone health. And they also concluded that there was no clear, consistent association, cause and effect relationship established at this point for vitamin D and reducing the risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and other health outcomes. So the relationship between vitamin D and those other non-skeletal outcomes is under active research right now with large-scale randomized clinical trials that should be available within about a year and a half. So one of the issues is the quality assurance in terms of the lab tests. And also, very often the clinical labs will give a normal range that is way higher than what the Institute of Medicine requires. So sometimes the labs will say that you need to get to at least 30 or 40 nanograms per mil. And this leads to excessive supplementation. And in some individuals, it can lead to their being started on supplements that are more than 10,000, 15,000 IUs a day. Excessive supplementation with vitamin D has been associated with some risks. It's been linked to increased levels of calcium in the blood and in the urine, calcium deposits, calcification in the blood vessels and soft tissue. And also, several studies are now suggesting that there's a U-shaped relationship between the intake of vitamin D and outcomes such as cancer, cancer, cardiovascular disease, all-cause mortality, and even some of the skeletal outcomes such as fracture and falls. There are several groups of patients who warrant screening for vitamin D deficiency, and this includes those who have bone health problems such as osteoporosis, osteomalacia, history of fracture, those who have malabsorption syndromes, which could include celiac disease and inflammatory bowel disease, gastric bypass surgery, those who are taking medications that can interfere with vitamin D metabolism, such as anticonvulsants, antituberculous drugs, and those who are institutionalized are much more likely to have a vitamin D deficiency disorder. Well, first, I think that it's important to try to get as much vitamin D as possible from the diet. And the good news is that nutrition labels will have the vitamin D content of foods. This will be mandated as of 2018, and beginning even in early 2017, you'll have more information about the vitamin D content of foods. And there are many fortified food products and also some natural foods such as fatty fish that can provide vitamin D. Mostly we recommend that people who are taking high-dose supplements of vitamin D do so with the guidance of their clinician. And so that's important, to know that their clinician actually thinks that the high-dose supplements are necessary. Those who want to hedge their bets and just take some supplementation, it really should be perfectly fine to take an over-the-counter supplement for 1,000, with 1,000, 2,000, even up to 4,000 IUs a day. But where we really advise caution is taking extremely high dose supplementation, more than 5,000, 10,000 IUs a day regularly, because there's very little research on the safety of long-term use of such high doses of supplements.